Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome back to the Age of Warfare podcast. I am Centurion Antius Maximus. That is my man, the Gate Aiden Cordier, and we are back again, guys, as you might well see. Being Aiden both in our summer gear because, man, it is hot where I am, and I imagine it's hot in the United Kingdom as well. So, no relief for you guys out there. But anyway, guys, other than the hot weather, we're going to be talking more about the Byzantine Empire. As you may well know, the last episode we spoke about the rise and how they came to power and all that good stuff. And today we're going to be talking about the downfall, because what must come up, what goes up must come down. So, and yes, the Byzantines kind of had quite the downfall, so we're going to get into that. But as always, Aiden, how are you today, my friend?
I'm good. I was been on holiday for the last few days, and left this morning to get back. Got back just in time for the podcast, ready to go. As you can see, that I have been sat in the sun by the lovely redness that I have managed to achieve, because I don't tan, I just go red. But yeah, I've had a brilliant time, raring to go, nice and relaxed as well. How about you?
Yep, I know the feeling of turning red like a tomato, so I know that feeling. Yeah, so now me, I've just been very busy with some new surprise release that came out. You can check it out when you can, and all that to say, everything's going well. Just been busy, man, but never busy enough to miss the podcast. And boys and girls, we got a good one for you today. And if you missed the last episode, please go back to the previous episode so you can get an idea who the Byzantine are. But just to recap for those who might miss it, who might be watching right now, the Byzantine Empire were the Eastern Roman Empire during the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. But the Byzantine Empire comes from the city of Byzantium, which ironically changes its name to Constantinople when the Byzantines take over. So, a little bit of a funny history right there. And, the Byzantines really adapted to a lot of things. They even used camels to in the military, and cataphracts, which were mostly a Persian thing, cataphracts. But then the Byzantines adapted it.
Yeah, it's those northern Turkish tribes that we were talking about. So if you go back a few episodes when we were talking about the history of the area around Afghanistan and that sort of eastern Persian area, it's all those northern people that came in with their with the various horse tribes that came in and settled, and the mix of armor, and then they built up this armor. Initially known as the Calibriani, which meant oven men, because it was so hot in all the armor. There we are, fun fact. But yeah, it's we've talked quite a lot about the influences from the east, whereas the Roman Empire was quite heavily influenced by the west. So if you think about it, your average Roman in the imperial age, you think of him wearing either the toga or the tunic, which looked like a sort of a short skirt, really. Yeah. Obviously, when they got into the West, they then discovered that trousers were a thing when you got to places like Britain, and that became more of a thing. Oddly enough, it came from the East as well. So, yeah.
And for those who don't know what we're talking about, this is a cataphract, a heavily armored cavalry in chainmail. This is so this is what a cataphract is. Let's see if I can find a better picture.
One of the interesting things about this is you see how heavily armored the horse is. As well, later horses, even when we think of those medieval knights, they only really had breastplates and the heads.
Yeah, exactly. The cool thing about cataphracts was that they wore chainmail, which was definitely more mobile. It made them more noble compared to the knights that wore full plate, partial plates. So I mean, plate armor is really cool and all day, but it really it limits your mobility quite a bit, and it doesn't completely discard the idea that somebody could get a lucky crossbow shot and kill you.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about these different types of armor. So for my undergraduate dissertation and my master's dissertation, I followed sort of this period of history up to the Crusades, and this is where you get the changes in armor of plates starting to come along, where they put it on top of armor. You look at Indian armor, Iranian armor, sort of Eastern Persian armor, and some Egyptian as well. You'll find sort of chainmail with a big metal plate in the centre over the chest to protect the heart. So you've got the flexibility, but you've got this extra added solid protection, which was then picked up by the Crusaders later on. But one of the things that you find with the Byzantines is quite common. It's kind of a they're known for it as sort of like is the scale armor. So you see on the horse, it's plenty of little scales on top of it that could either be backed by leather, by fabric, or sometimes even it would be backed with chainmail on the back of it, which in D&D is where you get these D&D terms that people use, like scale mail comes from that. While it wasn't an actual historical term, it's a slight misunderstanding of what the actual armor was and what was more common with the armor. But this is exactly what we're looking at here. So you can see this is obviously backed with cloth and leather because it's got the leather around the outside. So, I mean, you do that anyway, but you then use that to drape over the horse, because the last thing you want is your horse being completely rubbed by little bits of metal all day long. And the same thing with all their other armor.
And I know it's not I know it kind of gets away from the scope of today's episode, but I also wanted to point out the counterfeits actually moved into Bulgaria. The Bulgars they were also popular for counterfeits as well, but the Bulgarians, the medieval Bulgarian kingdoms. So just a little fun fact there.
So the interesting part of that is that, as we'll look at today, a lot of Byzantine influence ended up sort of north of the Black Sea with the Hungarians and the Bulgarians of today. So it's the Bulgars and the Huns of the area, the various other tribes. And obviously, as we mentioned last episode, you had Cyril going up and the Cyrillic, that's where that comes from. Trading with the Russians as well. So they picked up certain aspects of this Byzantine military and pulled them forward. One of the other interesting things is that influence comes from two directions for those tribes. So those horse tribes are the ones that were sort of north of the Black Sea, sort of southern Russia, you're thinking Ukraine all the way across to Kazakhstan and the Caucasus Mountains. And these Turkish tribes that we always talk about when we talk about these horse tribes, the Byzantines are influenced by the ones that came through the Persian Empire, the Turkic peoples, who brought these ideas across the south of that area. But obviously, it's the same sort of tribes that are going north of the area. As you go up through areas like Georgia, the country, not the state, you find that there's all these connections between that and then what's the one to the east of the Black Sea? It's the Aral or the Aran Sea or something. There's another one as well. So you've got this
Caspian Sea. No,
Caspian Sea, possibly Caspian Sea, possibly.
I think it might be.
My geography gets vague in that area of the world.
I think it is.
Yeah.
No, it is the Caspian Sea. Yes.
Caspian Sea. Well done. So, but in those areas and around those areas, we have this. And one of the things I wanted to bring up. So last episode we talked about Justinian. Justinian is one of the first emperors post-fall of the West to expand the Roman Empire into territory it hadn't conquered before. And this territory was on the other side of the Black Sea, so sort of Georgia, Ukraine area, that area where we're seeing the conflict now, the end of that line. That was the sort of area that they were looking at expanding into, making alliances and even conquering some of those territories. So these influences are starting to go north, even as early as the 6th century. I think the Western Empire has only been gone for about 100 years, and they've just it was Belisarius was the general I was looking for last time. It was him who conquered a lot of what was the Western Roman Empire, as we discussed. Not France, not northern Spain, not Britain, and none of the Germania. But along that Mediterranean coast, bits of Spain, and then North Africa was various different generals. And obviously, they reconquered Italy and Rome. So they had some of these influences from the West as well, but their expansion was limited to that coastal region because, again, something we talked about last time was this control of maritime trade to be able to increase the revenues to the Byzantines. And instead of before, where you had the empire sort of focused on the west, where they'd use the revenues from the eastern provinces, where it was a kind of static line against the Persians, and they'd use them to pile in to try and take Germany, you're now getting these western provinces funding to fight in the east and try and push the lands east and north around the Black Sea and further as to try and get towards the Caspian Sea, which then gets them around the north of the Persian Empire. Two flanks, easier to stop conflicts going into the territory that you don't want it to go into. So you get this switch, essentially, of it being money comes from east, flows into the west where they do things, to money coming from the west through the port trade and then going to the east so they can do a lot of stuff in the east as well. Hence, Eastern Roman Empire being a massive thing. So yeah, this is a perfect map for this.
This is actually a little bit of foreshadowing. I don't know if you guys who could notice the foreshadow. You look at this red 9. I'm sure Ada, you know what this red 9 represents, right?
Oh yeah. That's Justinian's conquest. So Belisarius took all of the stuff that's to the north of the Mediterranean. North Africa was him and Narses, I believe, and then various others through Egypt, Palestine, Syria, all of those areas around there. And then if you look up to the Black Sea, you see those little red areas. Those are the ones I was talking about, where they pushed further beyond those bounds and actually held them. As you look at the keys of the map, they held them, and more of those later than this greatest extent as well.
And then I mentioned this a little bit of foreshadowing because you look at the pink. This was the empire in around 1020. Obviously, definitely still a pretty sizable empire, but definitely not as strong as it was before. Obviously, they lost Rome. Obviously, Rome became the papal states at this point. They were now the papal states. Sicily was Muslimized. Actually, it was actually under Muslim rule. Sicily. That's another thing we might people might not necessarily know about Sicily. At one point, the Sicilians were actually Muslim in the early Middle Ages.
It's one of the interesting things is so obviously Justinian reconquers these lands, and the Muslims didn't exist at this point. So all of the people that he's fighting were either the tribes, like the Vandals in North Africa. They came all the way through the Western Empire, through Spain, into North Africa. So these are all people that the Romans had fought before. They knew how to fight. The ideologies that they were fighting against and the treaties they could make were similar to what they were before. See, there's cultural shifts as they go through, but they've kind of got an idea what's going on. Then you have the Islamic expansion, which is what takes out all of that area. So we know, obviously, as you said, Sicily became Islamic, Spain's Islamic, North Africa's Islamic, southern France, because they fought, they conquered nearly half of France before they were pushed back. It was for a short time, and then until they were pushed back into Spain. But they got really quite far up Europe before they were pushed back and things stabilized where they were. Now, one of the other things that you'll notice about this is it says Empire in 1020. If you notice that they don't have Jerusalem. Now, one of the things I did mention last episode was when it comes to the Crusades.
Yes.
That was the Crusades were called to retake Jerusalem because the Byzantines couldn't retake it themselves. Now, if you look at the date of when they didn't have this, they're nowhere near Jerusalem by 1020. And the Crusades took Jerusalem on Christmas Day, 1099. So the Crusades were set up. The rumblings of trying to set this up was in sort of the late 1060s and then to 1099. Now, if you think about this, this is the equivalent of if you think of the end of the First World War, someone doesn't have an area, and then us who were like kids in the 90s This would be like our parents going off to retake those lands
Right.
because they were lost in the First World War. This is exactly the same length of time that you have between these two things. So you can see how the reaction is. That it isn't just an instant, oh, well, we're going to go retake these lands. There is more going on behind this as well.
Right.
And obviously, the front lines fluctuated, and there's lots of alliances between Muslims and Christians and Muslims. It was it's quite famous that was it the Ghassanids? I can't remember which way round it was, but one of the big tribes in the area that allied with the Muslim forces was actually Christian. And one of the big tribes who was their rival was Muslim, and they allied with the Crusader forces as well. So while that area itself has been conquered by the Islamic people, you've still got a lot of Christians in the area. You've still got a large Jewish population in the area as well. So it's intermixed as well. You haven't, over this time period, you haven't just lost all of this culture. It hasn't disappeared really rapidly. As it would do when you look at a map. It's just who the money's going to in taxes is essentially what these kind of maps are showing us, of that control over those taxes and trade in those areas, of who has we're going to do the trade and we're deciding and we get the better of it. And this is where we can see that over those 500 years, this is, say, we're talking about the collapse here, over those 500 years, they have lost it's over half. It's nearly 2/3 of their territory within 500 years.
Now, before I go, we're going to go back to this map in a moment, but I want to diversify and go on a bit of a tangent here before we get into why they collapsed and show off the an empire many people haven't even heard of, the Latin Empire.
The Latin Empire, yep.
Yep, the Latin Empire was born.
One thing I will say before we go on is,
all right, go ahead.
Everyone notices Trebizond, famous in computer games for its archers.
Yes.
Trebizond archers.
Yes. Medieval 2 Total War. Yep.
Oh, yep. Carry on.
And then you have the Empire of Nicaea over here. And then you notice this little green section, Aidan? The Principality
very important.
The Perius, yeah. Oh yeah. The Latin Empire. I mean, I wanted to explain that the Latin Empire was born from the Fourth Crusade and the high. Now we're kind of jumping to the high Middle Ages. This was the high Middle Ages before we get to the late Middle Kingdom and all that. So basically, the Crusades was actually launched against the Byzantines to take Constantinople and Christianize it because it was under the Orthodox Church. So as you can see, the Latin Empire had Constantinople, Thessalonica. Thessalonica goes way back to the Macedons.
Go back to those episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. Then it goes all the way down to what is now modern Greece.
Yeah, so what's it called? When you have a victory, but it's not really a victory, like you win the battle, but it doesn't win the war. It's named after a Greek general. He was from Epirus, that guy as well. So that's how important that area is. Also, you've got Hadrian, and a lot of those soldier emperors of that period were all from Epirus. This is why it's a separate area, because they had a very strong martial tradition. And you can even see that today with, that's the area where Albania is. And you can see through Albania that they've got these really strong ties to their history. If you look at the Albanian flag, and you just have a look at the Albanian flag. It looks similar to the Russian flag, the early Russian flag, and it's that bird on it is Holy Roman Empire. They have this strong connection to the Romans, and they always have. So this is why that bit of land didn't really fall, because they saw themselves as kind of separate but part of this Roman Empire. So when the rest of it falls, they manage to keep themselves separate. Really interesting area of land. So Illyria is there as well.
Yes, Illyria, yeah.
As well.
And I kind of wanted to show this off because as the empire is influenced by the Byzantines, the Latin Empire, like we spoke about, the Nicaea Empire, the Armenian Kingdom of Sicilia. The Armenians are a very interesting people, Aiden. They're one of the most interesting people from the classical age to the Middle Ages, and even now. We're gonna have to do an episode about the Armenians. Very interesting people.
If you look at what is now often it's Turkish food, and there's a lot of influences on this. We're not going to go into the whole Armenia-Turkey thing because that's a separate thing episode. But when you go and you get a proper kebab that isn't just a you're drunk at night kebab, you actually go and get a proper one. If you look at the menu, Armenian food, yogurt, musical influences, all this Armenian influence is actually quite strong throughout the region. Like culturally, they're quite strong. Like I was saying about where Albania is, the cultural identity is actually quite strong in some of these areas, which is why when it splits up, they still are there because they already have their sort of regional identity, as it were.
Yep. So and then you had the Trapezoid Kingdom, which was the other kingdom that was influenced by the Byzantine Empire. It's a fun fact, Aiden. I'm sure you've heard of the rock band System of a Down. I'm sure you've heard that rock band.
Yeah,
they're Armenians. They are Armenians.
Yeah, lead singer Serge Tankian is his solo career, and obviously it's far more political, the stuff that he puts out, but he does about being Armenian, and that cultural stuff comes through in his music as well. And it's it's what I said about their musical influence comes through. That even today, System of a Down.
I'm gonna be some Tankian. Yeah, he's one of my favorite musicians, even though it's more political, but. And I saw one of his videos on YouTube talking about that neighboring. There's a country that neighbors Armenia that's been trying to conquer Armenia. I can't pronounce the name, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
It's on the tip of my tongue. I'd have to see a map. I'll be able to tell you with a map. But, and there's so much going on. There's these cultural identities that are part of kingdoms.
Yeah,
I'm sure people have heard about the Kurds, especially in the US. It's the first Gulf War. A lot of that was about how Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against the Kurds. Still a big thing. Eastern Syria, Eastern Turkey, Northern Iraq, and that sort of region there has another cultural identity within there that isn't a country at the moment as well. But you have these regions where you have these strong cultural identities all through the initial Byzantine area, which I find quite interesting. So when you look at the Romans, while the kingdom split, there's sort of a fair there's the concept of Romanization, where Romans turn up and they change everything to be Roman, and then people become very Roman in the upper echelons of society. Like Britain's a good example of this, where you get villas and the villa-style farming, and the way that people do things, the plumbing in the towns and everything. It's not until Rome leaves and you get the Saxons coming in with a different culture that you get this change in there. But ostensibly, by the time the Romans leave, the Celts become very Roman rather than actually a more separate identity. That separate Celtic identity is really more enshrined in Ireland, which is why people think of Ireland and Scotland as far more Celtic, even though Ireland, Scotland, Wales, we get it, but you've got Cornwall in there, you've got the rest of England as well. While it was England, there's still a lot of Celtic cultural influence coming through, but it's more melded into everything else. And this is the thing with the Byzantines that you get, where once the Byzantine Empire leaves, these kingdoms come to resurgence again. So obviously, like when the Romans leave, you get this resurgence of identities in these different areas as well. It doesn't last very long, obviously, because then you get the massive migrations west. But in the east, until the Turks migrate through, you get these identities becoming far more solid as well before they hit up against the Turks later on, which we will get to, obviously. Anyway, so carry on.
No problem, man. No problem. Now, now I'm sure plenty of you want to know, how did this mighty empire fall? You know, what was some of the reasons why the Byzantines eventually fell? I think obviously one of the biggest reasons was actually the Crusades. The Crusades was actually something that did not favor the Byzantine Empire at all.
Yeah. It's that late stage. So the way I see it, you've got two stages of the fall. And so what you're talking about is that later stage of the fall.
Yeah.
Of where the Crusaders were there to help. So when you look at this map, you see Sicily and you see the land sort of south of Naples. It was the Hauteville family, who were a Norman family, who came down and they conquered most of Italy. They actually fought against the Byzantines and fought for the Byzantines. The Normans were often mercenaries for the Byzantines, so you had this weird impact between the two,
right?
Where you had them taking the land and then doing that, and then they formed the bulk of the Crusaders. They are known as the Frange, because the First Crusade, there was one English knight, and that was only because he was living at his mum's, was being chucked out of England. And that's the only reason he was going on crusade. But it was basically the French. The Germans got bored and killed Jews in the Rhineland, nicked all their money, and had to go home. And there's all kinds of weird stuff that goes on. So you end up just with this body of Norman knights that turns up to do the main lot of the fighting. And the Byzantines have already had a lot of dealings with the Normans as well. And they know they can't fight them. And that leads to a weakening, not a strengthening, because the Crusader states are then at odds with the Byzantines, which means they've created another foe rather than creating an ally as such.
And because the thing is, some people might think, wait a minute, if the Crusades were supposed to take out the Muslims, right? Weren't the Muslims the one that were weakening the Byzantines? Wouldn't that help the Byzantines? Well, obviously, you know, the problem is the Catholic nations. There was no north between the Catholic nations and the Orthodox nations. Yeah, that's another component. Was that the Byzantines were Orthodox, not Catholic? You could see that there was no north between the two religions. So the Catholics didn't. The Catholics hated Islam, the Muslims, but they didn't really make the Orthodox Christians either. You know, they weren't the biggest fans of them either. So, you know,
when you think about it, and it's well known from writings as well, and they show this in Kingdom of Heaven actually, that the initial Crusaders, every crusade, they go out to the Middle East, and even when it was later ones and they go out, they'd noticed that the kingdoms of, like, all of the different kingdoms that you had there, I'm not going to go into say the kingdoms, not important right now, but they go out to support them. They realised that they were Christian kingdoms, but they had Muslims and Jews all throughout who were treated the same as everyone else. And they'd gone there with this religious zeal of, we should kill these Muslims, which is where you then get this continued conflict going on all the way through. But because their religious zeal is high, it's Catholic Church right, everyone else wrong as well. Because the Crusades weren't just there. The Crusades were in Spain. The Crusades were in the Baltic. The Baltic Crusades went on for a lot longer. France had its fair share of Crusades. The only reason that France is one country is because of the Albigensian Crusade, where they were fighting against let's call it the Perfect Heresy, because that's the name of the book about it. But it's the Albigensians, which is where the phrase comes from, kill them all and let God sort them out, when they took one of the towns. That came from a bishop as well. So that kind of attitude was through these crusading forces, and they were led by these papal legates. Notice the word legate coming in there. It comes through. It's obviously a very, very old title, because obviously Pope comes from Pontifex Maximus, which is one of the titles, which is a title that Caesar held. So they've still got this old Roman tradition there. And they believe that they are carrying on the actual Roman tradition, whereas the Eastern Empire are splitters, essentially. They're the people who aren't following it properly, which is quite interesting when you notice that you end up with this Kingdom of Nicaea, and it is the Nicene Creed, it's the Council of Nicaea that ends up creating this split. And the Nicene Creed is one that is spoken in churches throughout Christianity. They're slightly different depending on whether you're Orthodox, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Protestant. But the Nicene Creed is part of every single service as well, which is quite interesting that you get this connection. So it's you think of it like the Muslims are the cousins. Right, so if you're the Catholics, the Muslims are the cousins, because in early Muslim writings, it's you don't kill people of the book, so you don't kill Christians and Jews, right, out of hand. Heathens, absolutely fine. Christians and Jews, the same. This is why we call it Abrahamic religions, because they all come from the same kind of point of view. You then have the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church are like brothers. So the Crusades are kind of like the brothers getting together to fight against the cousin. But then when things settle down between the cousin and the brothers start fighting each other. And this is just a human nature thing of if take it out. Sort of if you're at school and the bullies come in for you, oftentimes if you've got a brother, your brother will step in. I had this, or someone tried to bully me. My brother.
It's a really good analogy.
To protect me. Yeah, at the same time, by the time we got home, he was the one punching me. It's like, because that's what brothers do. And it's that type of idea that you have to think about with these religions, as if they're a family that's sort of fighting each other in different ways. Then Protestants sort of see the red-headed stepchild of the lot, because they're the ones like, actually, I think something different. And everyone goes, well, none of us like you. But they're still part of the family because they still believe similar things as well. So you get this. This is where really that you find the European and Middle Eastern wars are starting to be sort of is the Islamic expansion really, and the Justinian as well, and those later days of the Western Roman Empire. This is where you start building into conflicts, having this religious component as a major component of it. So there's people say the Crusades are about religion. They're not about religion. Religion's obviously a massive component, but they're about taking back this land.
Correct.
Taking back the land has religious connotations, but actually it's the Byzantine Empire needs the revenue from the land to pay its armies.
Exactly.
Which is where it comes from. After the battle.
Not to mention Aden. Not to mention Aden. Remember when we spoke about the last episode about the Mediterranean Sea, right?
Exactly,
they need that territory because it's right next to the sea. What was the Mediterranean Sea? It was like the ATM machine of the early ages.
Yeah.
So
you think about it, if you look where it says Palestine, where Jerusalem is, if you take that coast, then how do people get into Egypt? That means they can't reinforce Egypt. So then you can take Egypt, which is why the later Crusades actually went into Egypt and tried to work their way up the coast. Because the idea was to control that coastal region so that the Western Mediterranean could be isolated from the Eastern Islamic kingdoms. And then that separated them, and then they could be essentially stamped out, as it were. And then you could recreate this Roman Empire, which, as we talked about the Holy Roman Empire, this concept that goes through a lot of European history up until the fairly modern age as well. Is even if you look into some of the Nazi ideology from the formation of the Reichs, this then goes back to the Holy Roman Empire and this reforming of the Roman Empire of these institutions, as we've talked about before. The entire setup of how the US government is and their buildings, they call it the goddamn Senate. Like, you've got this the Roman influence through politics all the way through, and it's also through this religious influence as well. But the religious influence tends to come from this later period, where actually it's a more Byzantine religious influence before you get the Council of Nicaea, and that's why we then get this split between Western and Eastern Christianity as well. And it's nice, you see, I'm talking about it so much because it becomes this massive component.
Because it's a really big component. I mean, people don't think. I mean, there's a certain reason why I said the Crusades is the number one reason, because I truly believe it was maybe the biggest reason for their fall. Many people will say not really, but it really was. It should have favored them, that's for sure. And I wanted to go back to Medieval 2 Total War. There's an expansion campaign where you play as Crusades. You know, the Crusaders, Antioch and Jerusalem. But you can also play as the Byzantines, and the Byzantines have the hardest campaign because, you know, they got to take out the Crusaders and the Muslims, and not to mention you get Crusaders from Venice, from Italy. Yeah. You know, they encroach on your lands in the Byzantine Empire, so you're getting attacked from all different sides. So you know, you got the Byzantine Empire in the middle right here. You know, and then you got Venice, you know, you got the Kingdom of Venice on to your west. You got Antioch and Jerusalem to your south, and then you got the Turks to your east. Oh, and not to mention the Mongol invasion that came later.
Oh, yeah. That appears. Weirdly enough, the last crusade was actually by the Mongols, and they were successful. They absolutely destroyed parts of Egypt and the Middle East. And it was a Christian one as well, because the Khan who led it, is his wife who was a Christian. And this goes back to mythology.
A Christian Muslim. Yeah. Let's just take a moment and put down a Mongol that became Christianized. Yeah, that was a thing, folks.
There was this concept and this myth about Prester John. Now, Prester John was supposed to be where, after the First Crusade did fairly well, they were on the back foot from then on. And it was only a matter of time before the Crusader states fell. Hence, constant crusades to try and keep the number of knights fighting in his lands and protect these lands. And there was this mythos that this Eastern Christian would come through and would conquer and help the Crusader states, take the pressure off of them, so that they could then fulfill their idea of creating the Christian state around Jerusalem and that being all powerful. Now, one of the interesting things about that is, as soon as you get this Christianized Mongol coming in, he fits this bill. He's Eastern and he's Christian, and he's come with a large army to take the pressure off of the Crusader states from the east. So you end up with this really weird situation where it's a prophecy that's fulfilled itself, and it's weird. If you go into the Prester John mythos and mythology that surrounds that, it's a really interesting concept. But it shows that even the Crusader states, when they set themselves up, knew that they were going to fail at some point, that they were looking out for a savior to return and to help them and show them the way forward. Now, does that sound very familiar in a Christian kind of way, possibly? So you get this mythos that builds up, but it gets melded with the second coming of Christ, which is why that becomes a massive thing. And then, obviously, you get the Templars rocking up, doing Templar things.
and you know, because there's plenty of videos that say that the Crusaders destroyed the Byzantine Empire. You know, you're gonna find videos like that and all that good stuff. Let me give you I've got a final picture here. The Fourth Crusades. Yeah, this was the Crusaders. You know, taking on a painting of the Crusaders invading the Byzantines. The Fourth Crusade.
Looks like it was 1500s at least, if not later. There's some fantastic ones in the Ashmolean Museum where they've got these ancient battles, but they used to paint the armor that they could see at the time, and that's how you can date certain paintings. So there's one from the 1600s, and they're all wearing what looks like English Civil War armor, and there's some Italian ones from the 1500s that look like they're and Spanish ones as well. The conquistadors, they all look like conquistadors. It's
I know.
Oh, yeah,
conquistadors, right?
But yeah, this is an ancient Greek battle. It's like, but why are they dressed like that? Why are they using these weapons? Because they just painted what they saw. It's this split. I could go into the art history moment with this, with the burning.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget, these are artists. I mean, we're talking, and sometimes artists do exaggerate certain things in their art. So, you have to take that into account as well. So
this is the. So I am going to do one art history moment. The darkness in this that you see, you've got this darkness and you've got this light. This is because a lot of the paintings at the time there was the thought behind them. There was more meaning to the paintings at the time. There was more symbology to them, which is where people look at modern art and go, "What's symbology?" And then people make something up. It's like, no, with a lot of modern art, there isn't symbology. It's just, here's a cool technique. Look, it looks nice. But it's because a lot of these early ones were taking on the Sabine women is obviously a very famous painting, and there's a lot of symbology in that as well. Not to say there were the Dutch masters who did the whole weird thing with skulls, as that was just a painting technique. It was like, the magic eye images. They did that whole thing. They started that. But you get this darkness. If you look at Caravaggio's painting, I absolutely love Caravaggio, that are later. And he did the Supper at Emmaus is the famous one. It's kind of a study in foreshortening, but he drew from this type of imagery to get that darkness and then coming into light. And the whole reason I'm pointing that out is this is the whole way that they thought at the time, and this is a lot later that they're describing and painting this with these thoughts around the subject. It's the mindset, essentially, that I'm talking about, of this thing's burning and this light is going to come forward, which is a core concept of Christianity that they're seeing. So you've got this Prester John idea. You've got these paintings that are emulating this idea. It's so ingrained in people that they are. Is this the fall of Byzantium in the Fourth Crusade? Is that the
I
flag
think so,
of Venice?
Yeah.
That's the flag of Venice. So the interesting thing about this is when they attacked, the Doge of Venice was a blind old fat man, and his troops wouldn't attack. And the story goes that he jumped off the boat and stood on the little bit of beach bit, and he planted the flag and said, "If I can do it as a blind old man, you can do it." And that's how they took Constantinople. The reason the Crusaders ended up, all the Crusaders who took Constantinople in the Fourth Crusade were excommunicated, every single one of them. The only reason they did that was they couldn't pay for the boats in Venice. So the Doge of Venice just turned around to them, like, "You know what, mate? It's like, you help us with this, and we'll let you have the boats for free." And I'm like, "Yeah, right, cool. Yeah, as long as we can get people back." Well, loads of Crusaders went, nah, no, we're going home. And they did, which was fine. But all the ones that followed ended up creating the Latin kingdom as well. And all it was to go back to what we keep saying, so that Venice could control the trade routes around that sea,
right,
Constantinople and the Aegean, and therefore the Mediterranean ATM comes in again. And it's exactly the same concept. And that is the whole point of this. But yeah, that is... So I'm surprised I actually recognise that flag straight out.
Yeah, the Kingdom of Venice. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we spoke about the Crusades, and yes, the Crusades might have been the biggest factor in the fall of the Byzantine Empire, but there were other factors. And I think the second most important factor, and this goes back to my days of playing Medieval 2 Total War and RTS games. The Byzantine, if you ever play Medieval 2 Total War, you might see that the Byzantines have pretty good cavalry. They got some great horse archers. Yes, we all know how we feel about horse archers. Overpowered in video games. You got your Harpender trapezoid archers. One of the best foot archers in the game. And the infantry is pretty darn good. I like the infantry, the Vanguard Guard. Oh man, it's badass.
You've got your branches, and you got your very solid core of infantry in certain armies.
But this is where the bug comes, and they have pretty good siege equipment. But there's one thing I omitted. I didn't say. Let's see if you know what's the one thing I omitted from the Byzantine army. what's the one thing they didn't have that others did?
So you got your light cavalry, you got your heavy cavalry, you got your siege, you've got your elite infantry, you've got your good heavy infantry. They've got the peltas, which are kind of all right. One thing you miss is that they even had very good medium cavalry as well.
Yeah,
numbers. It's numbers. They just didn't have the numbers. It's the numbers. The thing you've admitted. I don't know what troop type you're going for, but
okay, go ahead.
When you look at elite forces,
yeah.
So a good example is the British Army. You look at the British Army, and you compare it to, say, the US Army. Our army is better than the US Army by training. Our equipment is, well, we get it from the US, so it's either on par, but the training means that we can use it slightly more effectively. But this is the difference between it is the core training. Because we're a smaller country, we've got a smaller force. Which means that we focus on the training to make our force more elite, so we don't have the numbers in there. So one-on-one, a British Marine could take a US Marine, but take the entire lot of British Marines and then take the entire lot of US Marines. The US Marines are going to win that because there's more of them.
Yeah.
And it's not that the British Marines are like 10 times better. They're just a bit better than the other side because of that. And this is what the Byzantines had, is the core force that they had, very, very good.
Very, very.
But it was only just a little bit better.
Yeah.
But
and
they had everything. They even had horses.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, boy. But I'm going to tell you, Aiden, that's a really strong reason. Man. That the Byzantines were just outnumbered. It's a really good reason. Yeah. However, I'm surprised that there's something you missed, and I'm gonna put up a hint.
Oh, bloody yeah! I was still stuck in the early stuff. Yeah, the later stuff. Gunpowder.
They had no gunpowder. They never adapted gunpowder. They had a very strong army, but it was a Roman-esque, it was a Roman-style army that took over the world when they were Romans, when the Romans were in charge.
But they did have flamethrowers, so
yeah, but obviously the Ottomans were the ones who took. Eventually, the Ottomans. That wasn't the Western world that took them over. It was the Ottomans that took them over. And the Ottomans had gunpowder. They had janissaries.
And the irony of this all is that janissaries were slave soldiers who were drawn from the same people that the Byzantines were drawing their soldiers from. So all the Byzantines really needed to do was get hold of the same weaponry, and they'd have trounced them. Because to go back to that analogy I said before between the British Army and the US Army, is you got the same equipment and a little bit better training. If you can go head to head with them on even numbers, you're good. But it's once the numbers start going, which means we do have to actually go right the way back to Justinian, because I believe the collapse actually comes with Justinian's expansion. So, this greatest extent of the Byzantine Empire. Everyone was like, oh, they reconquered this stuff. This is absolutely amazing. However, one of the big things that the Romans always ended up doing was overextending themselves. If you look at when they went over the Danube, they ended up losing that territory. If you go to the Rhine, they go over Varus, where are my legions? So we can see this. The amount of legions they had to put in Britain, because the Britons were just a bit too far away and there wasn't that much there. They had to cut their losses. You see them losing all of these territories to come back. So they've overextended themselves. And one of the problems was there was a lot of court intrigue. And that court intrigue told Justinian that Belisarius was trying to kill him and become emperor himself because he was leading the powerful armies and they loved him. This sounds very Roman Empire or late Roman Republic. It's the same thing going on. Exactly the same thing that happened to Caesar. When you really think about it, it's exactly the same thing. Just
almost 1,000 years later.
So you end up with the same situation occurring. So Justinian loses Belisarius as this amazing general that is holding all of this together. And while he does have other good generals that do a lot of these things, and Justinian himself is pretty damn good, you're relying on this single person. It's the Greek political thought argument against having an autarch, a single person at the head, because you get a good one, you get all of this stuff. If the next one's not as good, you lose all of the stuff. So it can be sort of feast or famine along that, whereas you might not get as much if you have sort of an oligarchy, but it's spread out and so on and so forth. This then ends up creating these divisions in the empire. And then the Black Death arrives, because this is the first time the Black Death arrives in Europe, is in Justinian's reign, Justinian I's reign. And because he's conquered all of this territory, it spreads the Black Death throughout all of the area. So we then get it settled. So it's just going to recur then on until obviously the Black Death as we know it in the 1400s, the plague of the 1600s coming along later. But this is where this starts happening. And this is when we were talking about the lack of Byzantine troops, because they'd all died from the Sodom plague, so there was no one to do the fighting. And that's where they build up these forces, plague hits, lose a lot of their forces to plague. No matter how well trained someone is, if they get sick and you can't cure it, you've just lost it all. So it's that investment in the troops. Whereas if you've got loads of troops that are crap and you lose a whole bunch of them because of the plague, it doesn't really matter. If you've got a lot of elite troops, or not so many elite troops in the plague hits, still going to lose the same number of people, but it's going to hit you a lot harder. And then you don't have this. And then the gunpowder comes in. Because the only way they're getting gunpowder is by making alliances with the Turks and getting that through that end of things. And, well, they weren't doing that quite clearly because it was the Turks they were fighting when they needed the gunpowder.
Yep, as you can see here, we have a picture of a bombard cannon from Turks. And the reason I say gunpowder was a big reason that the Byzantine Empire kind of fell was because if you play Medieval II Total War, the Byzantine Empire campaign, it starts off pretty easy, but it kind of gets it. But if you met the Turks and some of the other nations tech up, you know, they start getting guns, you're going to have a bit of a hard time because you're stuck with archers and, you know, I mean, you got good troops, but you know, but as you can see, gunpowder would destroy anything. You know, you start to fall behind tech and archers need.
So one really interesting thing about these early guns and even into muskets in the Napoleonic Wars, which is the 1800s. There was an attempt to revive the longbow amongst British troops to save ammunition and gunpowder, because it's always been a British tradition to have this. We had all the stuff to make these. We'd lost the tradition of training, which is why it never really happened. But you then get it in more rural areas where you get archers that are actually doing things in this. Ironically, the Turks in the 1800s were the ones using archers against muskets, which is a bit of a turnaround. But it's the cannons where it really comes into it, because this arquebus, like Spitfires, it's not particularly accurate. It's firing a little piece of stone. If that hits you, oh yeah, you're gonna feel it, or potentially you're gonna die. In fact, you're probably just gonna die. But that thing's firing like once every 2 or 3 minutes type of thing. It's not like a modern rifle where you just, like, it's a military one, you just hold down the trigger and you're taking people out. So you've got this idea, but it's the simplicity of use. This is why the crossbow won out against the longbow, because in that trend, it was why the musket won out against crossbows and longbows, because it's easy to use. Now, these early gunpowder weapons were the same thing. This is how they became big. There's one of the battles in the early 100 Years' War in the 1300s, the Battle of Sluis, was actually the first use of British naval cannon. And we had cannons on ships, and the French didn't realise, and it had a similar effect. We absolutely destroyed them. And this is what then happens as people start getting this technology. It starts overriding everything else. Of like, we'll put big thing in, make go boom, smash things apart. So you don't have to have complicated trebuchet calculations and making sure it's all set up. You just put the big solid thing in one end. You just have to have the metal technology to create something that's solid enough
Yeah,
to fire.
this is look at the mortar. This is the earliest one of the early mortars. You know, or if you play Age of Empires 2, the bombard cannon. And once you get access to those, you can pretty much destroy a castle and like that.
Yeah. You just take out their troops, so you rock a bunch of them up, and you don't even have to defend them.
Age of Empires 2. I mean, I know I talk about Medieval 2 Total War, but I think Age of Empires 2 does an even better job displaying the power of gunpowder. Because if you got a gunpowder civilization like the Turks and you get bombard cannons, it's game over. You can pretty much conquer the map pretty easy once you know what you're doing. Because castles can't take out bombard cannons, and you know, and unless you're playing what we call the Bohemians, who have even better gunpowder. You know, gunpowder is almost like the S tier of Age of Empires 2 troops.
One of the really interesting things about it is it's the way that the walls are constructed as well. As technology makes a little bit of a leap militarily, you end up with these weird things happening. So the First World War is one that a lot of people know about, the advent of machine guns and trench warfare, and people didn't quite know what to do, hence why it was so brutal. One of the other things in the First World War was their naval cannons and the ships. And the advances in their ships were very fast, so it made a lot of them obsolete. So, ironically, to keep it in the same geographical area, the initial idea was to use the old ships to smash their way up to Constantinople, to take the Turks out of the war and create a second front to come at the side and extend that out to collapse Germany. Obviously, that fell apart because there was loads of political stuff that went on. That's a separate episode. But as technology makes a leap, the old stuff becomes very obsolete. Then this happened with walls as well, because if you built a wall against a trebuchet, you build it in a certain way, because trebuchet fires in a certain way, the impact's in a certain way, the force hits it in a certain way. Anyone who's ever done anything with construction knows that you construct a wall differently depending on how it is load bearing. So you've got a load bearing wall or a non-load bearing wall. If it's bearing a load of X amount of stories, or if it's bearing a load at an angle, and everything like that, you could shot the wall in a different way. Now, this happens with cannons as well, because the cannons are firing more directly at the walls, whereas the trebuchet is firing at an arch as well. And you get this change in castles when cannons start arriving, where you don't have these towers with sharper corners, which actually are kind of effective earlier on. You get them with curved ones. Then later on, you end up getting really weird with star forts as well, which the US is famous for having some quite good star forts. The Revolution, and I think in the Civil War as well, they became very prominent. And it's fields of fire from them that you have, and it's a completely different style of warfare. So the old walls just become obsolete. You just can't combat them if they've got a big enough cannon, which is why the Theodosian walls that had staved off things for 1,000 years, guy rocks up with a few cannons, takes a couple of weeks, and bang, he's in. It's just obsolete like that. It's just amazing how quickly it happens.
Yeah, man, it's crazy. Obviously, quickly before we get done, obviously, let's go back to the map here. Yep, let's go back to our trusty map. Obviously, as you can see in the red section, that's when the Byzantine Empire in 1360. Although what this map doesn't show was that after 1020, the Byzantine Empire had a bit of a renaissance. They had a bit of a comeback after after the events of 1020 and beyond. They had a bit of a renaissance. It looked like they might have been regaining some power. But then it just quickly fell apart around the 1300s, about the mid to late 1300s. It all just fell apart.
So one of the interesting things here is I just double-checked the date of the Battle of Sluis, which is the English ships using cannons against the French.
Right.
This map is 1360 for those bits. The Battle of Sluis happened in 1340. This meant that technology of using cannons had reached England on the far fringes of Europe 20 years beforehand, like a generation before this, the Byzantines were still struggling at this point to get gunpowder technology. They didn't really use it. So it's, as you say, it's this gunpowder technology that's really just tipping the balance away from them.
Yeah, but you know, and the reason I bring up gunpowder so much is because I truly believe, if you take away gunpowder, I think the Byzantines would have survived longer. They really had the elite. I mean, the Turks, they had really wonderful gunpowder, but everything else they had, it really wasn't all that good. I mean, the cavalry was okay, but the infantry was pretty bad, and the archers were mid. They were at this mid-level. I mean, the Turks were in that. I mean, the Janissaries is what made the Turks the Turks.
And if you look at what the Turks have been known for up to this point, it's like the cavalry, the horse archers. Oh, brilliant! They can move around and maneuver and take you. Well, as soon as you're behind some walls, all right, cool, you can run up and down our walls. What's that achieving? Like they can't really do all of their tactics. They lose that. So this gunpowder then comes in and
it did, because believe me, I played as the Byzantines in the medieval total war. Their infantry is way, I mean, I gotta tell you, it's way better than the Turks. Believe me, Aiden. If you could take out the Turks only in medieval total war, you'd be set. But if you make them take up to Janissaries and gunpowder, you're going to be in for some shit, especially on harder difficulty levels. You're going to be in for some really, really bad shit, because their gunpowder is, I think, it's top tier.
One of the other interesting things about this is to get gunpowder, you need money. At that point, at the point that England got cannons, England was doing very well for itself. The English kingdoms. They had the money, controlled massive chunks of France as well. This is a bit of the 100 Years' War where like England was quite top dog. And so they're able to afford this. Now, the problem the Byzantines had is they were shrinking constantly. So they were losing revenue constantly. So they didn't have the money to invest in that. They didn't have the foundries to create the right metals to be able to make the cannons. They couldn't hire the people who knew the technology. And they couldn't just buy some in to try and do something with them. And I'm sure if we look through the literature, we'd probably find points where the Byzantines used arquebus and various other things in limited numbers. But they kind of stuck with the crossbows, because the crossbows against early arquebus are actually fairly comparable, because the crossbow had a higher rate of fire, had a similar amount of power, and only a little bit of extra training to do that, but you needed to be a certain type of person to do that as well. It's like, it's always been said, the gun's the great equalizer. A small person can use a gun if they know how to use a pistol properly, which doesn't take very long to train. Or a rifle if they know how to use it properly. Or, in this case, an arquebus if they know how to use it properly. Whereas with a crossbow, if you haven't got the shoulder power in a crossbow, like, it's one of the things I noticed when I was firing a crossbow. I had the shoulder power at the time. I was digging every day. So I had a good strength in my shoulders. I'm right-handed. So my shoulders are built more as an archer. So every time I pulled that back, as soon as I was getting slightly tired, when you pull the string back, it was going at a slight angle. So I was firing slightly wide. Whereas when you've got a musket or something, like, as long as it's not that accurate, but as long as you're pointing it in the right direction, it's going to go that direction. And you can vaguely aim with it, and it's only going to get better. And it's not about the person being better, it's about the thing being better.
Yes.
Whereas a crossbow reaches its peak, and then you just got to make sure the person using it is better, like any handheld weapon or anything like that.
Right.
So you get this, as you say, it's this gunpowder, it's this revolution in technology that comes along as well.
Yeah, and one more thing, the Byzantines didn't really use crossbows too much. They stuck with their regular archers. They weren't really into crossbows, and you might say, well, archers or you need more is going to be an archer, but I definitely think the Byzantines did do a disservice to themselves by not using crossbows. I mean, crossbows are definitely more powerful than regular bows. That was just a fact. That's why the Italians were one of the powerhouses. The Italians in Spanish, because they had crossbows. The conquistadors.
it's one of the interesting things is the only reason that the bow is seen as like, well, the bow is just as powerful as a crossbow. Yeah, because everyone compares it to the longbow, and it's people don't quite realise the amount of social engineering that happened in England at the time to make that longbow force as well, to be able to use these powerful bows. It was mandated from a young age that you had to train with this every week.
Yeah,
I think it was like 13 or 14 that you had to train. So people were physically designed to do that. They're socially engineered to do this. Because it's what I was saying about the training. A crossbow, anyone can pick up a crossbow and be taught how to use it.
Yeah, that's exactly.
But you don't have to train every. Yeah, if you trained every Sunday, you'd be pretty good at it. But you don't have to train every Sunday to be useful and have this big core of archers that you can use. And so it was, I think it was Bulgarian crossbows, Bulgarian troops they used with crossbows. The Byzantine, and this goes back into what we were saying about mercenaries as well. So it's very much like Carthage, where they used to hire mercenaries, and Carthage ended up collapsing because it didn't have enough money to pay its mercenaries. Its mercenaries turned on it. Byzantines went the same route at the end because they didn't have the troops, so they built it.
Yeah, they didn't have the numbers. You're right. Yeah, but that
Crusades
came,
as well. That's why the Crusades came much.
That came to towards the very end. That but gunpowder was it was already in the 1300s already being developed. So they had plenty of time. They just never adapted. That's just the truth of the matter. Now, granted, the Crusades didn't do them any favors. You're right. That's a big reason. It did not do them any favors. But anyway, guys, we have reached the end of the episode, and of course, the Turks took over the Byzantine Empire, and that's why you have minarets on the Hagia Sophia now instead of what it used to be now. You have those minarets.
Yeah, and lastly is so occasionally you'll hear someone argue that the Roman Empire didn't fall until 1918 or 1921 because the Turks took over the Eastern Roman Empire. Their change in religion to Islamic religion isn't actually a massive change when you think about changing from pagan religion to Christianity.
Right.
From Catholic Christianity to then Orthodox Christianity. At one point, Mithraism almost became the main thing. And then you change to Islam. It's just a different group of people in charge of the same thing in the same area. You still have Romania controlled by the same people. This area is still controlled by the same people. Look at Turkey now. That's basically what the Byzantine Empire was at this point. If you look at that map, that's basically just Turkey with a couple of extra bits. So it's not until the Ottoman Empire eventually collapses that we end up getting, and that empire centered around that city collapsing, and then everything going different, because when you get Ataturk and then the rise of the Turkish nation, republic and everything like that, that's an interesting thing that we might be able to do later on. But you can theoretically argue that the only difference is religion. There's no reason to see Islam different to any other Abrahamic faith in being in control of this area and then using this as a hub to carry on. So the Roman Empire was always moving east. As we've talked about throughout this entire episode, this focus from west to east was happening in the 500s. And then it happens more east and more east. And then you get the Turks, who were already part of the Byzantine Empire, and they're controlling it. So you can make this argument that actually the Ottoman Empire was the successor to the Byzantine Empire, which makes it a successor to the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Which is then what you then get all these conflicts with the Holy Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and all the stuff in between. And then the Battle of Vienna comes along later on. And that's where we get all that fancy stuff happening.
Yeah.
And croissants are then made. But this is what we're looking at. It's this cultural change through time. If you took a Byzantine from the collapse when they got taken by the Turks, and you compared that to your average person of the same type living under Augustus at the beginning of the empire, or living, say, under the Gracchi years earlier during the fall of the Republic. Those two early ones, they're very different. The differences between those two people, they've got a different religion, they've got a different outlook on life, they've got a different language, they've got a different armor style, they've got a different focus on what they're doing. They've got a completely different culture. The way that they see their emperor is completely different. The whole world around them is different. Yet we still call them Romans as well as these early ones, which is why you get this artificial distinction in literature to call them Byzantines, because they've changed so much. And then this is where you get the Byzantine collapse. After you get the Roman collapse, then you get the Byzantine collapse, which is why that's the argument against it being the Ottomans are then the continuation of the Roman Empire, because we've already differentiated through. So it goes Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, and then you get the collapse later on. So you get these separate distinct things, but that area of the world has a lot, like our episodes on the area around Afghanistan and that region. There's been so much that has gone on there. It's been part of this, and then part of that, and part of this, and then part of that. But you can still see all of it through all of the architecture, through the art, through the ethos of how people think and how people's culture is.
Right.
It's all sort of melted into one with all of these influences coming in there. And I think that's kind of the important point, is that while the Byzantine Empire did collapse, it was so different to the Roman Empire by the time it collapsed that some of those cultural influences are still around. As we said, Bulgaria, Hungary, even Romania, Albania, a lot of those areas as well. You get this culture which is sticking around in those cases. Even Turkey has some of these influences from these early days as well. And then it really shows, as we talked about with the architecture, and as Angel said, with the minarets surrounding the Hagia Sophia, that it's all just becomes all interlinked as well.
Mm-hmm. But so that was a wonderful way to end the episode. Yeah, we are well beyond the hour, but that's okay.
Oh, wow.
We it was a not to cover, guys. And so, guys, thank you for watching the past two episodes. I hope you learned a little more about the Byzantine Empire, or should make you like to call it the Eastern Roman Empire. And I already have a good idea. I already have an idea for the next episode, Aiden. The rise of popularism.
Yes. I'm all over that one.
Yeah, but that one's going to be a nice spicy one for you guys. The rise of popularism. Heroes just as Javier Milei of Argentina, because I gotta tell you about how he's managed to turn around Argentina. I mean, I'm not going to get into it right now, but we're going to talk about the rise of popularism and what are the consequences, good and bad, of it. So join us in 2 weeks as we explore the world of the kind of governments that go beyond the traditions of traditional governments. So until then, guys, I am Suetonian Antius Maximus. That is Negate Aiden Cornier. This has been episode 34 on the road to 50. We're getting there, guys. We're getting to 50. But for now, we enjoy the rest of your weekend and take care, everyone. Later.
Take care, guys.